Ladies and gentlemen, hit subscribe to this channel right now. This month, we will find out whether or not the Supreme Court, and hit subscribe to this channel. I can tell you right now that Samuel Alito and Clarence Thomas have already given Trump at least partial immunity. It will be a 6-3 or 5-4 decision. We'll find out the oral arguments, I should say, and then officially in June. Late April, and watch this channel, we will see and we'll hear the conservative justices completely eviscerate the same type of argument that they did during the Colorado ruling, which was a 9-0 Supreme Court victory for Trump, overturning an absurd Colorado ban. Hit subscribe to this channel in a couple of seconds. You will hear former and future President Donald Trump. He's on his way to victory. Nothing is stopping this man. Okay, not late night comedians, not virtually all of media, not intel officials, nothing. Nothing is stopping Trump from giving us a great economy and a great foreign policy, which is what we had under Trump during his first tenure as president. Earl and Paul Bartlett, thank you so very much. Thank you to my super chat. Thank you so much, Paul. I can never thank you enough. Earl, thank you so much. I want to read you Jack Smith's court papers in response to the Supreme Court looking at this, and you will get to hear President Trump in a second. The Constitution does not give a president the power to conspire. Okay, he didn't do anything of the sort. Obstruct proceedings, he didn't do anything of the sort. Deprive Americans, nothing of the sort took place. They're making absurd leaps of logic. Trump performed a speech that is protected under the Constitution. He did not rob a bank. They're trying to say that his speech obstructed a proceeding. There's a basic logic. This is the same type of arguments Democrats tried to make when they tried to ban Trump from state ballots. He has never been accused of committing an actual crime like breaking into a building. What they're trying to do is criminalize things like a speech, like presenting his viewpoint, that Democrats railroaded him in the same manner they railroaded Bernie Sanders in 2016. But if you look, they're making very grandiose leaps of logic. You can even look here. Let's see, page 46 here of the filing to the Supreme Court by, even if the court were inclined to recognize some immunity for a former president's official act. And by the way, the Supreme Court precedent, that was Nixon v. Fitzgerald. Presidents are immune from civil cases, from civil liability. Okay, that should translate also to criminal, blatantly partisan criminal allegations. But here, he was not. And the special counsel knows this, and you'll hear from President Trump's attorneys in a second, but the special counsel knows that he was acquitted. He was acquitted of exactly what they're trying to indict him on. But then it says, even if the court were inclined to recognize some immunity from a former president's official act, it should remand for trial because the indictment alleges substantial private conduct. He's allowed to have private conduct with individuals. Again, this is not a break-in. He didn't actually do anything criminal. What they're saying is he lied, which is what Biden has done routinely about Hunter and the laptop and graft and bribery schemes. But they would never in a million years. He lied also about classified data. They said he didn't have the cognitive abilities to be tried. So they're going to give him partial immunity. It's going to be a huge, monumental victory, ladies and gentlemen. A monumental victory. So hit subscribe to this channel if you're new. Let's listen to President Trump and his attorneys. And Earl and Paul, thank you so very much. Let's get started.
I'd like to make some comments on behalf of President Trump. First of all, this was a momentous day. This is the first time in our nation's history that a sitting president has decided to prosecute his major opponent, who's leading in all the polls in the country. The issues that the court had to deal with today were momentous. Whether or not a president of the United States could be prosecuted for carrying out his responsibilities doing his job as president. We can't have a country where every 4 years there's a cycle of political recrimination where one administration attacks a prior administration when in fact that candidate is leading in the polls and will be the next president of the United States. As our legal team, as our appellate team made clear, that would be a disaster for our country. That would be a direct attack on democracy, and that cannot happen.
Attention, all drivers out there!
What was very significant today, and I'm sure you all caught it, is the special counsel conceded that if it was President Obama, consider immunity. But when it's not, when it's President Trump, then they're taking the position that there's no immunity for presidential acts that were required when a president is carrying out his job responsibilities.
The entire indictment is just Trump lied, therefore he committed a crime. He tried to deceive the American public. Well, the Democrats with the Mueller probe lied through their teeth. He was never an operative of the Kremlin. There was not even a shred of evidence, not even a shred of evidence aside from an assessment by individuals who didn't like Trump and a Steele dossier that, by the way, Clinton and the DNC had to pay a fine from the FEC for purchasing. They used campaign donations to purchase a complete lie-filled dossier. And so you want to talk about defrauding people? Trump believed. The Democrats never believed that Trump was an actual operative of the Kremlin. They literally purchased the evidence used to investigate Trump. They just needed a pretext. Trump actually believes, just like Bernie Sanders, just like people who say, I was the biggest Bernie Sanders booster on the internet, according to the Huffington Post, and the unofficial scribe of Sanders' most hardcore voters, according to the Washington Post. I can tell you, unlike Trump, Bernie Sanders folded in 2 seconds, was completely railroaded by the Democratic National Committee, did nothing in response. Trump truly did believe that he was railroaded and went through courts, worked with individuals within his administration. He had every right to do so, lost court cases, did not defraud anyone. He truly believed everything he was saying. There was not a Mueller-style investigation with people testifying under oath. There was not one legitimate investigation. Nobody testified under oath. Then they had a computer firm in Arizona come up with a whole bunch of questions. Then, of course, the headlines were, the computer firm, actually bolstered Biden's victory. It's like, no, they came out, if you read what they wrote, they came out with 1 million questions that were unanswered. Nobody testified under oath. Every single attempt at counting over again resulted in 0 people under oath in Congress, whereas the Mueller probe, you had people's lives ruined. They had to spend hundreds of thousands on legal fees. They testified under oath. There were millions of pages of documents, and they found nothing against Trump. Now they know that they're losing, so they indicted him for hundreds of years in prison. Not 1 second will this man spend in jail or prison, because the indictments are written as if an MSNBC producer wrote them. They're very grandiose, and they would affect the presidency forever. Again, Trump did not break into a building. He performed a speech that they tried to criminalize that had literally nothing to do, absolutely nothing to do. He told people to go peacefully. The fact that they didn't listen to him, that's why things took place. They didn't listen to him. He said, go peacefully. And then they say, oh, he tried to obstruct a congressional president. No, he didn't. He had every right to go ahead and perform a speech. So they'll give him some immunity, and that'll be a huge, huge, huge monumental victory.
If we adopt what the special counsel wants, if we adopt what President Biden wants, then we open the Pandora's box to political prosecution after political prosecution after political prosecution. In fact, Joe Biden could be prosecuted for trying to stop this man from becoming the next president of the United States. We don't need political prosecutions, we need political process. I'd like to introduce President Trump.
Well, I want to thank you all, and we had I thought, very momentous day in terms of what was learned and what they've conceded. They conceded two major points that were they were right in doing it. I don't think they had much of a choice, but they're very, very big, very powerful points. And I think we're doing very well. I think it's very unfair when a political opponent, is prosecuted by the DOJ, by Biden's DOJ. So they're losing in every poll. They're losing in almost every demographic. Numbers came out today that are really very mind-boggling if you happen to be Joe Biden. And I think they feel this is the way they're going to try and win. And that's not the way it goes. That'll be bedlam in the country. It's a very bad thing. It's a very bad precedent. As we said, it's the opening of a Pandora's box, and it's a very sad thing that's happened with this whole situation. When they talk about threat to democracy, that's your real threat to democracy. And I feel that as a president, you have to have immunity. Very simple. And if you don't, as an example, if this case were lost on immunity, and I did nothing wrong, absolutely nothing wrong, I'm working for the country. And I worked on very hard on voter fraud because we have.
A key tenet of their argument is that he knew he was lying. Ask Bernie Sanders if he was. Democrats even railroaded their own candidate in Bernie Sanders. Okay, you think they would be beyond a shadow of a doubt that they could do the same thing to Trump? And when you hear, oh, it's been litigated, there was no evidence, you weren't going to find any concrete evidence in a 2 to 3 week span where even Saturday Night Live goes after a woman who sided with Trump in Michigan. There was a concerted effort, okay, to do a lot of things, especially prevent any meaningful investigation. The Federal Bureau of Investigation was not a part of any investigation. So it's really funny. There's no real investigation as to Trump's claims. Trump's claims were never really truly investigated. The judges said, where's your proof? Trump couldn't provide immediate proof. There you go. Okay, it would be like the equivalent of you saw your car one day, and then the next day you saw somebody that you knew driving the car that you used to own. It's like, well, gee, I think that person maybe stole the car. Did you see the person actually break the window? No, but you can put two and two together. So basically, Trump did not have the evidence, but he had reason to be suspicious, as did most of the country. Okay, I mean, he lost to a man who couldn't even put two words together, who makes things up, makes words up, slurs his speech, can barely find his way out of a room. And so, yeah, people were incredulous. Yeah, and you look at what they did to Bernie Sanders. Just look at what they did to Bernie Sanders. So, I mean, what they are trying to do, ladies and gentlemen, is they're trying to criminalize discontent or disagreement or a denial of official results. He can deny official results all he wants. Stacey Abrams in Georgia did it. Hillary Clinton has done it from day one. They wrote a book, What Happened, and then they blamed the Kremlin. You have 50 intelligence officials coming out of the woodwork and saying that, it was a plot by another country to inform you of Hunter's laptop. I mean, their entire lives, Democrats, is pure public relations, but they're still losing. Okay? You have every late-night comedian, every major newspaper, every major publication, cable station, all 24/7 after Trump, and he's still up in the polls. What does that tell you about the American political establishment? Trump is still up because everybody knows what's taking place. The average Democrat doesn't even understand the D.C. indictment. These are broad allegations that didn't happen. He didn't obstruct a proceeding. What did Trump do to obstruct a proceeding? He wasn't even there when criminal activity took place. And the Federal Bureau of Investigation actually stated there was no concerted effort by Trump or any of his allies to do anything criminal. That was in the Daily Beast, AP. So, I mean, all of this is like they're going to give him immunity, either partial or complete immunity, and it's going to be the most monumental rebuke of what they're trying to do with Trump. And then they'll convict him in New York. Nobody will care with the hush money. And then that'll be overturned on appeal because these are federal crimes that the state of New York is trying to level against Trump. Michael Avenatti brought that up on MSNBC today, okay? And he's right about that. And he gave an interview from prison.
We have to have free elections. We have to have strong borders. We have to have free elections. Tremendous voter fraud during the time. And that was what they really focused on today during the appeal. And they concede that, and everybody concedes that. And if it's during the time, you have absolute immunity. So we'll see how it all works out. We have a great argument. We have an argument with, they conceded two major points today. In fact, I think it's probably a concession. You have to ask the lawyers, Todd, if you'd like to talk about it. But they conceded 2 points that I think were, by normal standards, if it weren't me, that would be the end of this case. But sometimes they look at me differently than they look upon others, and that's very bad for our country. You had a very big event yesterday, as you saw, in Georgia, where the district attorney is totally compromised. The case has to be dropped. They went after, I guess, 18 or 20 people. They wanted to go after a lot of other people. They wanted to go after senators. She was out of her mind. Now it turns out that that case is totally compromised. In fact, they say she's in far more criminal liability than any of the people she's looking at. So I think that when you look at what happened, where they pay a lawyer with absolutely no experience $700,000 who happens to be her lover or her boyfriend, and then they go on trips and vacations together, very expensive vacations together. And the reason they paid him so much because he was after me, because this way they can afford to pay him a lot more. It probably passes a certain test. And that's a very sad thing that happened in Georgia, and I would imagine that case is going to be dropped. Every legal analyst that I've spoken to, every legal analyst that I've read have said that case is so compromised now it has to be dropped. Very good people were very badly hurt by that case. It's a shame. Very good people. People did nothing wrong. They did nothing different than what Democrats have been doing for years and years and years, whether it's slates or anything else that you're talking about. But they were very hurt, and it turns out that she profited tremendously on that case. It's illegal. What she did is illegal. So we'll let the state handle that. But what a sad situation it is. I want to thank everybody for the fairness. We've been covered very fairly. Most people agree that we're entitled as a president to immunity. If you didn't have immunity, as an example, Joe Biden with the prosecutor, we're not going to give you $1 billion unless you get rid of the prosecutor that's after the company or his son or whoever it is they're after. But he wanted that prosecutor gone, and he's on tape saying it. Or you could say the horrible job he's done at the border where our country is being destroyed, or the horrible situation that took place. The lowest moment, I think, in the history of our country was Afghanistan, the way we withdrew. Not that we withdrew, but the way we withdrew. With shame, we surrendered. People killed, 13 great soldiers killed, many unbelievably, horrifically hurt, wounded, hurt. And hundreds of people died on both sides. Hundreds of people died. He could be prosecuted for that. So you can't have a president without immunity. You have to have, as a president, you have to be able to do your job. But if this didn't work out, if I wasn't given immunity, then other presidents, when we talked about today, President Obama with the drone strikes, which were very bad. I'm very confident that eventually, hopefully at this level, but eventually we win. A president has to have immunity. And the other thing is I did nothing wrong. We did nothing wrong. The investigation of the election, which was a rigged election, the signed documents, the lying to Congress, and the stuffing of the ballot boxes, all of something like that happens, you wouldn't have inflation, but much more importantly, you wouldn't have had the Ukraine situation.
So, ladies and gentlemen, you could look at the papers filed by Jack Smith in response to the Supreme Court. Alito, Justice Clarence Thomas, Justice Kavanaugh, Justice Barrett, Justice Roberts, and Justice Amy Coney Barrett. I believe that's the sixth, right? So Alito, Barrett, Kavanaugh, Thomas, Roberts. There's six. It's 6-3. So you're going to get and Gorsuch. Gorsuch. So you're going to get at least a 5-4 with Alito and Clarence Thomas already giving. When I do these segments, they haven't done it yet. They've already given Trump presidential, at least partial presidential immunity. Then it would go back to lower courts. Then they would have to find out, well, why was the speech? What did this man do? See, Trump did not actually commit a crime that you could say was an actual crime. They're trying to criminalize his speech. They're trying to criminalize him speaking to his administration officials. They're trying to criminalize the fact that he stated viewpoints that they think are completely debunked, which of course are not debunked. There was never a true investigation where people were were forced to testify under oath to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Trump did not have the luxury of an actual investigation to investigate his claims. Not like in the manner that Democrats did. And then when people actually came out and supported Trump, they were disparaged by Saturday Night Live and others. And so the issue is not about, like, it's true, Trump did not have categorical proof. They never had any proof that Trump was an operative of the Kremlin, yet they investigated and they got the benefit of the Mueller probe and all of that. So let's go ahead and watch Alina Habba, and then we'll listen to Clarence Thomas and Alito, Justice Alito and Justice Thomas.
So tell me a little bit about the immunity argument that was made in the court today. We saw the president come out. We heard from him that he believes that he has complete immunity. And yet some of the questions that we heard from the three judge panel, I should say, were surrounding whether or not that is an absolute situation, because they brought up a number of different instances and asked, would that provide immunity for a president? In other words, if it has to do with an election and arguing an election, does that fall under the immunity that we've seen prior presidents get for national security actions that they have taken? And the word that we've gotten from attorneys watching this is that they are not sure this D.C. court is going to go along with the argument that in this situation, the former president is immune.
So what makes the Supreme Court, and why I say to you that, and just like I told you, there'd be a 9-0 Supreme Court victory with Colorado overturning the Colorado ban, I'm telling you, the Supreme Court's going to look at this because the conservatives, especially Justice Alito and Justice Thomas, and Justice Gorsuch also, are looking at this and saying the indictment is too broad. It's too ambiguous. He didn't defraud anyone. The voter, the average American doesn't even know why he's being indicted. Even Democrats have no clue. Oh, yeah, he tried to obstruct proceedings. No, he didn't. He didn't do anything of the sort. His speech was just that, a speech. That's all he did. And so this segment, for educational purposes, took place before the Supreme Court took it. And like I said, this month you'll hear some amazing back and forth between the Supreme Court justices and the special counsel lawyers. But the D.C. courts, of course, sided with the special counsel. Of course. You ain't going to get a fair trial in New York or D.C. for Trump. The issue, though, is that, thank God, the Supreme Court isn't influenced by overwhelming media, where journalists have turned into activists, where publications have turned into extensions of the Democratic Party. Again, they cheated Bernie Sanders. What makes anyone think they wouldn't do the same to Trump? Let's continue.
What was your takeaway from what you heard in there today?
I've argued presidential immunity, Martha, ad nauseum, because I represent the most targeted former president in American history. I can tell you right now, absolute immunity, or what we call presidential immunity, is an immunity that exists to not only protect presidents, but protect Americans. And that was the arguments that we heard today. If you all of a sudden change an immunity that has been in place forever, that has been in place for very good reason, then how are presidents to protect the country? How are presidents to speak to the press and address the nation when they're afraid of defamation in civil claims, when they're afraid of criminal charges for having military take action against our enemies? It is hypothetical after hypothetical of extreme situations that are not the current situation. That's what I heard today. And I think our counsel did a great job of presenting what has already been established law. Presidents have to perform in their duties with absolute immunity from claims, because while they are sitting in president, Martha, it is not just, and I want to explain this in plain English, I always try and do that for non-lawyers, it is not just acts within his employment as the sole member of the executive branch. It is also for acts in the outer perimeter. It is for things, decisions he has to have discretion to make. If you have no discretion, then why are you elected as the president of the United States? That is the bottom line. The president was the president. He should be afforded immunity. And frankly, if the D.C. court does not make that decision, that would be mind-boggling to me, to be honest.
So how long, tell me about the time frame, because obviously all of this is layered in an election year. This will likely go to the Supreme Court, and their decision is likely to have bearing on a number of these cases. So what do you expect in terms of timing, and do you think it's going to be delayed, and for how long?
Well, let's not be twisted on why we have a timing issue. There really isn't a timing issue. The only issue is the one that the Democrats have created because they're concerned about losing in 2024. So they've created this epic proportion of rush. It's a consistent rush. It's putting pressure on the Supreme Court. It's putting pressure on these circuit courts to rush to decisions because they create a sense of urgency that frankly does not exist but for the fact that they are losing in the polls. So we are looking at this hectic rush. However, if you look at the decision with Jack Smith in the Supreme Court recently, they are calling them out on it. The rush to ruin an election is not, frankly, a rush at all. It is an urgent election interference claim that they've all colluded to do, in my opinion, and I've seen it time and time again. Presidential immunity is a slam dunk argument. If this case is not decided the way I think, frankly, the law states it should be, then yes, it will go to the Supreme Court. They will probably have to rush a decision because I'm sure prosecutors that we've seen that are Soros-backed will rush it. It's unfair, frankly, to the Supreme Court that they're being put in this position, but the law is very clear, and I think it's an easy decision to make.
So you look at the justification, you look at the court papers, the Supreme Court argument that, and this is from, this is, I believe, from NPR, but this is the argument made by Jack Smith to the Supreme Court. Okay, even if the court even if the court were inclined to recognize some immunity from a former president's official act, it should remand for trial because the indictment alleges substantial private conduct in service of petitioner's private aim. It wasn't a private aim. There are 70+ million Americans that feel that or that voted for Donald Trump. Okay, this wasn't just him trying to get some kind of hotel deal. Again, Democrats have done this to their own and within their own primary. Okay, so he had every right to contest results, to make claims that Democrats think they've debunked, which they haven't. Again, Trump never had the opportunity to get the Federal Bureau of Investigation involved. Okay, so Democrats get a special counsel, all like immense media coverage and the benefit of endless media coverage on their political side. You even have people, I mean, you go to bed at night, or millions go to bed at night not, you know, a million plus, let's say, or 2 million, to Stephen Colbert and Kimmel just going after Trump every second. Trump doesn't have that luxury, okay? So you have an immense public relations monstrosity against Donald Trump, and he's still up in the polls. And most people have no clue why he's being indicted. They have no clue regarding hush money. The hush money issue is not, it's actually very legal. You can pay what's called hush money. It's a legal transaction. An NDA is a type of hush money payment. Okay, non-disclosure agreement. They're obviously going after Trump because they want to tip the scales in their favor. You have Democrats who have literally campaigned to try to imprison Trump. Then when Trump says, okay, he's going to lock up somebody with private servers with top secret intel on them, oh my God, he's an authoritarian. Oh my God. So it's like, it's pretty unbelievable. Tough it out. Thank you to my super chat. Thank you so much, Paul. Everybody here. Thank you, Earl. Thank you. But you look, the special counsel knows that the indictments are way too broad. Okay, it knows that the Supreme Court, that's why the Supreme Court, here you go. 3 private actors, 2 attorneys, including one mentioned above, and a political consultant helped implement a plan to submit fraudulent. Those were not exact. There was a precedent for what these people did that was legal. So, and again, a lot of this is taken out of context. I'm not going to get specifically into, the Federalist has a wonderful article on the fraudulent people that Trump allegedly, in a fraudulent manner, tried to hire or tried to utilize. He didn't hire them. He tried to utilize them. The Federalist article talks about it. It's completely legal, and there's a legal precedent for this in U.S. history. So again, they accused Trump not of breaking into a bank, but they accused Trump. They accused him of doing legal acts that have essentially amounted to a crime, which is very bizarre and very ambiguous and broad. You're trying to imprison a former president, okay, for conducting his presidency in a manner you disagree with. Let's go ahead, though, and listen to, and Justice Thomas is going to ask this question. So this is one of the reasons the Colorado ruling was a 9-0 United States Supreme Court victory for Trump. And this is one of the reasons Justice Thomas is going to side with Trump on immunity, at least partial immunity, because he's going to ask this question. Just one sec. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm having some issues with hold on one second.
That it's in the amendment where do you have contemporaneous examples, and by contemporaneous I mean shortly after the adoption of the 14th Amendment, where the states disqualified national candidates, not its own candidates, but national candidates,
The only example I can think of, Justice Thomas, is the example of Congressman Christie, who was elected in Georgia in, I believe, 1868, and the governor of Georgia refused or declined to certify the results of that election because Mr. Christie was disqualified. But I think it's not surprising that there are few examples because we didn't have ballots in the same way back then. Candidates were either write-in or they were party ballots, so the states didn't run the ballots in the same way, and there wouldn't have been a process for determining before an election whether a candidate was qualified, unlike the processes that we have now that states have created under their Article 1 and Article 2 powers to run elections.
But it would seem that particularly after Reconstruction and after the Compromise of 1877 and during the period of Redeemers, that you would have that kind of conflict. There were a plethora of Confederates still around. There were any number of people who would continue to either run for state offices or national offices. So it would seem that would suggest that there would at least be a few examples of national candidates being disqualified, if your reading is correct.
Well, there were certainly national candidates who were disqualified by Congress refusing to seat them.
I understand that, but that's not this case. Did states disqualify them? That's what we're talking about here. I understand Congress would not seat them.
Other than the example I gave, no. But again, Your Honor, that's not surprising because there wouldn't have been, states certainly wouldn't have the authority to remove a sitting federal officer. So
what was the purpose of Section 3? The states were sending people. The concern was that the former Confederate states would continue being bad actors. And the effort was to prevent them from doing this. And you're saying that, well, this also authorized states to disqualify candidates. So what I'm asking you for, if you are right, what are the examples?
Well, Your Honor, the examples are states excluded many candidates for state office, individuals holding state offices. We have a number of published cases of states considering that.
I understand that. I understand the states controlling state elections and state positions. What we are talking about here are national candidates. I understand. You look at Foner or Foote, Shelby Foote, or McPherson, they all talk about, of course, the conflict after the Civil War. And there were people who felt very strongly about retaliating against the South, the radical Republicans. But they did not think about authorizing the South to disqualify national candidates. And that's the argument you're making. And what I would like to know is, do you have any examples of this?
Many of those historians have filed briefs in our support in this case, making the point that the idea of the 14th Amendment.
So many of the liberal historians have filed briefs in a 9-0 unanimous Supreme Court victory for Trump.
That was that both states and the federal government would ensure rights, and that if states failed to do so, the federal government certainly would also step in. But I think the reason why there aren't examples of states doing this is an idiosyncratic one of the
and 9-0 victory for Trump. So that's what they're going to ask. Okay, just like the Colorado Supreme Court. Okay, these are very intelligent people. They understand the Constitution. They understand, the law, at least in Colorado. Well, maybe they don't understand the Constitution. You would think that they're very intelligent. The Colorado Supreme Court found that Trump should be barred from the state ballot because he committed a rebellion. Yeah, that's what they came up with. The Supreme Court unanimously, in a biblical unanimous rebuke, overturned that ruling. I'm trying to tell you, this is the presidential immunity case is the most consequential case. This could lose Trump. This could actually lose Trump votes because if he doesn't get immunity. Marcus, hello. if he doesn't get immunity, in which he will, Democrats can spin that in, well, this is a federal, he's a felon, because he broke federal laws. And he tried to overthrow and obstruct Congress, and he was basically, engaged in criminal acts. And they could spin that in a way they couldn't spin the hush money. Nobody cares about any of these indictments. Democrats are looking at Trump saying, oh, we got him. They have happy indictment day segments on YouTube. It's like, well, imagine when Trump does that to Democrats. They'll say he's an authoritarian, a despot, totalitarian, a tyrant. But when they do it, it's happy indictment day. Okay? So it's just unbelievable. But let's continue here. And he will get partial immunity. That's what I'm trying to... This is the biggest story. See, they'll convict him with the hush money nonsense. They will convict him. But the Supreme Court of the New York Court of Appeals could very well overturn that if it gets to the Supreme Court. He didn't even the man didn't actually use his own money. Michael Cohen used his own money, and Michael Cohen's a convicted felon. So Democrats don't want you to vote for a convicted felon in Trump when they convict him in New York. And the reason that he would become a convicted felon is because a convicted felon in Michael Cohen said that he committed a crime, which, by the way, he only admitted to because he was engaged in financial crimes. So, and then they upgraded a misdemeanor to a felony. They would only do that for Trump while they actively suppress any information that could be detrimental to Democrats or indictments against Democrats. Like Hunter, for example. I mean, clear bribery and graft. You're put on the board of directors of a very shady energy company where emails are asking for influence. The New York Post published emails literally saying, how can you use your influence? And still they can't put two and two together. But this is really interesting. I'm telling you, when they give Trump presidential immunity, it'll be absolutely huge.
How do you see the arguments falling in that case?
Well, as you know, I predicted the outcome of this case exactly, how the court would decide 9-0 using the fifth section of the 14th Amendment. On the issue of immunity, I'm going to make a prediction here, too. I think both sides argue too broadly. I think Trump was wrong to have his lawyers say that if a president orders the SEALs to kill his opponent, he can be immunized unless he gets impeached first. That went too far. The answer should have been, of course not. Now let me explain. But I also think the lower court went way too far.
I'm not exactly sure that was Trump's argument, but let's continue. This is actually, Professor Dershowitz is 100% right. He was 100% right on the Supreme Court ruling in Colorado. I'm certain he'll be right on this one too. They'll give him at least some immunity, which will be a huge, devastating rebuke. It'll dismantle the indictment in D.C. He will have effectively won the case, because then he can dissolve the special counsel when he becomes president. Special counsel is part of the executive branch.
By having no immunity whatsoever and saying that whatever a president may have had immunity while in office, he loses that once he leaves office. I hope and I suspect that the court granted cert in this case in order to come out with a nuanced decision that focuses on precisely what are presidential acts. And if they're within the scope of presidential acts, then they have to go beyond the presidency itself. Let me give you an example. President Eisenhower in 1954 sends troops down to implement Brown versus Board of Education. One of the children or one of the police officers is killed. And the new president coming in, a Democrat, years later wants to indict Eisenhower for having done that, even though it was in his presidential authority, I think we would all agree that there has to be some immunity, and we would all agree that he can't have total immunity for everything he did as a politician or as an individual. So I think the Supreme Court hopefully will come out with a nuanced decision that will give guidance to the lower courts as to when immunity is applicable, when it's not applicable. We can bring the country together on this issue as well, instead of simply having extreme views on both sides.
So if that happens, and I'm certain it will happen, at least it'll get some immunity, like Professor Dershowitz was saying. The left and Democrats are going to absolutely implode. They will be livid beyond belief, because the special counsel will not be able to convict Trump. The special counsel will be completely dissolved after he becomes president, and there goes the partisan attempt at imprisoning Trump. Because the thing is, he is immune. He didn't break into a bank. He performed a speech. But let's continue.
You know, I actually concur with what you just said, and I appropriate in this case, and maybe even the better argument for the court. Your take.
Well, I think the Supreme Court looked at the circuit court decision and said, hey, you went way too far. You're dismissing any notion of immunity, even if a president acts consistent with his duties. That is absurd logically. And it's inconsistent, by the way, and this is the important part, with the Supreme Court precedent 4 decades ago that a president does have absolute immunity from civil lawsuits as long as his actions fall within the outer perimeter of his official acts. Well, you know, Sean, the exact same reasoning applies to criminal prosecutions. If it's otherwise, my goodness, the chilling effect.
Greg Jarrett, who's fantastic also, is talking about Nixon v. Fitzgerald. Okay, presidents are immune from civil cases. So why on earth wouldn't that translate to a criminal case where Trump did not actually commit a specific criminal act? What he did, what Democrats are trying to do is they're saying, well, he engaged in this Byzantine, labyrinth of legal activity that amounted to a criminal attempt at conspiring to overthrow the will of the people. But none of that actually took place. He didn't obstruct anything. Mashed potato brains, we've been suffering from for 4 years. So, I mean, it's like, if he's a tyrant, Trump, trying to, dismantle democracy, he's doing a terrible job. We've been with mashed potato for 4 years. High inflation, high interest rates, chaos, a foreign policy catastrophe everywhere around the world. Yeah, that's Biden's fault. So he didn't stop anything. And his attempts were legal. He went through the courts. He went through his attorneys. There was nothing like, he didn't actually break a specific legal statute that they could have indicted him on a week later. This was a long attempt at drawing out an indictment just to coincide with 24. But it ain't gonna work.
On presidential decision-making would trigger paralysis. Instead of a chief executive, so America Greg, would be ruled by a committee of lawyers. They'd be afraid to do anything out of fear of future prosecution.
Greg, let me ask you this. Would a more nuanced version versus the argument of absolute immunity maybe be, of course, you have freedom of speech, but you can't yell fire in a crowded building? Would that be, would there be an analogy there?
Yes.
And you would expect the court to do that.
And Jordan said this as well. I suspect the current justices will extend the existing immunity standard in civil actions to criminal cases and then remand the Trump case back to the trial court to decide whether Trump's acts are covered.
So if they do that and they say, oh, yeah, a speech is protected under the Constitution. Speaking to your attorneys is protected. Okay. the speech is at the heart of the indictment. There goes any effort at imprisoning Trump. So the whole thing will be dismantled. And again, they're also accusing him in Georgia, where presidential immunity is also part of the equation. There's even some issue with First Amendment or presidential immunity, I think, with even the hush money. I think I read something about how that coincides with presidential immunity. But anyway, you're not, and then classified data, it's like Clinton and Biden did infinitely worse than Trump, who actually didn't even commit a crime. So a president has the power to declassify, and every president has taken classified data that they've declassified. And the National Archives was dealing with Trump's attorneys. And then they say, well, he didn't have the power to declassify certain documents. Yeah, neither did Clinton. How about any document? Clinton had no power, neither did Biden as vice president. And what Biden did was worse than what Clinton did. And what Clinton did was somehow transfer top secret intel onto servers. What Biden did was even worse. At least Clinton probably got tacit approval to commit these types of crimes, it's a criminal act to put classified data onto servers. You can't put top secret intel on servers. It's impossible to do so from a cybersecurity perspective. It's impossible. You can't just go ahead and put classified top secret intel on your, email account. It's impossible to do so, but Democrats found a way to do it. With Biden, he had classified data as a senator without the power to declassify. If the argument is that Trump didn't have the power as president, he had no power at all to declassify any of the documents as senator. So there goes your argument. You're going to go after a former president saying that, well, certain documents he couldn't declassify? Well, yeah, Biden couldn't declassify any of the documents. So what's your defense there? Anyway, hit subscribe to this channel, ladies and gentlemen. It should be a countdown every day to the Supreme Court oral arguments, which begin late April 25th, I believe, 24th, 25th. But I'll see you tomorrow evening, everybody. God bless. Earl and Paul Bartlett in Australia, thank you so very much. Hit subscribe, everyone.